Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 PM GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Windows on the World. Yes, it's going to be an interesting show tonight. I've got Piers Corbyn here, and he's going to be contributing quite a lot to the things that we're going to bring up. The title of this week's show is State Spies and Their Lies Exposed. It's getting really, really silly now. It's all about the insanity of the new Stasi, the one we're up against. However, we had a very good talk in Oxford last week in Didcot, and we had a great turnout. We've got another talk coming up on June the 1st in Glastonbury, and you can book tickets there. It's £10 for the whole day from 12 till 6, and we will be taking questions afterwards and probably having a drink in the bar of the King Arthur pub, which is where the event takes place. And we will be there on the 1st of June, and you can buy tickets at windowsontheworld.net. So that's the part of our ongoing tour up and down the country, and we are organising more, and there's more and more people actually getting interested in it because obviously they're becoming very affected by what's going on. But yes, the title of tonight's show, State Spies and Their Lies Exposed. Yes, it's all about the insanity of the new Stasi. So this week we're going to look at the full-on propaganda war and how it really is just one big clown show run in the main by compulsive liars. It's now compulsory, yes, it's compulsory for all those in all forms of public office to lie. Well, you did know that, didn't you? We have actually got very good evidence that the mind virus is spreading quicker than anticipated, especially among those that call everything a conspiracy theory, and those who call everyone who doesn't agree with their fakery far right. It's an epidemic right now, and the government are doing nothing about it. Yes, we are witnessing an extinction event. The truth is now extinct. There is a climate catastrophe, and it is the current climate of fact-free opinion and belief. But first of all, yes, the climate crisis. Get this. Get a load of this, and have a little think about where this could have possibly have come from. Drowned cities, stagnant seas, intolerable heat waves, entire nations uninhabitable, and more than 11 billion humans. No, it's not the beginning of a dystopian sci-fi novel. It's just another brainless, fact-free opinion piece in, no, not the UK Guardian, but the Observer. Well, you do know that they get all their propaganda from the same two sources, don't you? You know, Reuters and AP, but in this case, they have just made it all up. Now, in the week that the UK Guardian changes its propaganda terms on climate change to sound more scary and ridiculous, that bastion of climate science, the Observer, and the author of the piece, using the alias, Gaia Vince, that's G-A-I-A, yeah, the Great Earth Mother, Vince, put out this... Right. Yeah, you get it, Piers. Do you see where it's coming from?
Yeah, man.
Let's save the planet, man.
Yeah, holy man.
Yeah, they put out this opening dystopia. Now, maybe it's just the pen name of Edmund de Rothschild, because he was the joker who set the climate change conspiracy off, along with, of course, the wanted criminal Maurice Strong. Don't you remember when this was, folks? It was in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit. We do bring this up in our talks. It's very interesting, actually, the whole background of where this came from. Most people who listen to the shows will have a bit of a background in this, but if you're listening for the first time, do look up some of our previous shows on the Climate Change Con, which is basically what it is, and you have to know where it really came from. But yes, this is absolutely incredible. It carries on. This is from the Observer, okay? The heat is on over the climate crisis. Only radical measures will work. Experts agree that global heating of 4 degrees centigrade by 2100 is a real possibility. The effects of such a rise will be extreme and require a drastic shift in the way we live. Now, yes, get this, I think we should say it all again before we bring in our weather expert. Drowned cities, stagnant seas, intolerable heat waves, entire nations uninhabitable, and more than 11 billion humans. No, this is not David Attenborough. This is from The Observer. A 4-degree warmer world is the stuff of nightmares, and yet that's just where we're heading in decades from now, with no evidence and no mention that it would be contradictory to the solar minimum we're in. And that's what we're heading for. However, let's not get wrapped up in the detail. While governments mull various carbon targets aimed at keeping human-induced global heating within safe levels, including new ambitions to reach net zero emissions by 2050, it's worth looking ahead pragmatically at what happens if we fail. Now, all of this is about projections that never have come true, and most probably never will. In fact, it would be much more useful if they talked about the possible catastrophe that could happen with the Earth being struck by a comet. It's much more likely to happen than these predictions that they keep making up but never ever come true. So it says climate models predict we're currently on track for a heating of somewhere between 3 degrees C and 4 degrees C for 2100. Although bear in mind that these are global average temperatures at the poles and over land where people live. The increase may double that. Well, an interesting point to bring up here before we bring in our weather expert is that the actual weather stations that measure all this stuff have been proved to be not only inaccurate, some of them are not there anymore, and a lot of the data is fraudulent anyway. So when they're talking about this 1.5 temperature rise, it's totally insane because that's so difficult to measure on a global basis. I'm going to bring in Piers Corbyn now for comment. What do you think?
Well, yes, it is complete nonsense. The bizarre thing is, though, when you tell these Extinction Rebellion or other sort of believers that it isn't going to happen, there's not going to be a massive world weather crisis or extinction of species. In fact, the rate of extinction of species is decreasing, not increasing, as an observed fact. When you tell them it's untrue, they get upset. Now, look, this is bizarre. I mean, they're telling us...
You're taking away their victim status, Piers.
Well, I know that, but it's...
Well, that's cruel, isn't it?
Well, when we say it's not true, they ought to welcome this and ask why, but instead they just get very upset. I noticed this 4-degree temperature, it's a complete fiction, and it's made up by models or even just made up by journalists.
They made it up. I don't think it's even a model thing. They're just saying, well, it could happen. Well, anything could happen. This is my point.
This figure is the same as the one used by the World Economic Forum, that is the Davos junket every year, where they use that to justify trillions of pounds has to be spent, in fact, stolen out of pension funds and the like to spend on stupid projects like improving batteries and so forth, more and more. I think, it's worth mentioning here where I was last night. I went to the 50th anniversary dinner of the British Society for Social Responsibility in Science. It was founded...
I bet that was empty, wasn't it?
There's a lot of people there. It doesn't function as an organisation anymore, but it was founded 50 years ago and I was involved in that. And, it's done a lot of very good stuff. I mean, different radical science networks, fighting real pollution, hazards at work, various weapons technologies opposing those and so forth. But I went to this dinner, right, and... a friend of mine said, well, look, if you say anything, Piers, you'll have 90% of them against you. And I said, well, that's right, we better do it then. And
that's better than a normal average, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I said that 50 years ago, when those of us who were students then were starting out, we sort of believed in science and the empire would solve everything. But now, what we have is the green and greedy united are dictating the direction of science, the narratives of science, and basically everything. And when I said to them, look, man-made climate change doesn't exist, that upset a lot of them. Not all of them, to be fair. There's people there who definitely agreed with me. But I said, and it made an interesting point, I said, look, in the 1930s, if we were around then, this group was around then, during the eugenics propaganda narrative, most of you here would have been part of that, because most universities were. Most academics really believed it. They believed that the less intelligent people had to be, limited in their abilities to breed.
Of course, this is all proved, Piers, when Darwin was studying the beaks of birds in the Galapagos Islands. So what are you talking about?
But you see, the survival of a species is not about just the brains. It's like if you've got take a stealth bomber versus MiG fighters. Well, the stealth bomber's smarter, but you can make 10 MiG fighters for one stealth bomber.
But if Darwin's evolution theory is correct, why are there so many stupid people around?
Well, okay, but the 10 MiG fighters can easily beat the stealth bomber, and that is the point about human evolution, that there may well have been subsections of humans which had larger brains, but the group which survived were the ones that had tribalism in them and were able to exterminate others, you see. So, this idea of what is good and should be defended or something.
Yeah, they tend to mix up adaptation with evolution.
Yeah, but anyway, so I told them, I said, look, in the 1930s you would have been part of the eugenics movement, which you now abhor. And I tell you that you are now in another eugenics movement, namely the man-made climate change and Extinction Rebellion. And then I spelled out, I said, look, Gail Bradbrook recently on ITN News said that we're only doing this because that's what governments want us to do. They want us to set up a movement to demand that they implement all these things that they want to do. Now, the things they want to do are things that the globalists and the World Economic Forum want them to do. In other words, they even say in public that it's all a game. Yet
that
a lot of
brings us on to the next
scientists
part of the show.
believe somehow it's still true.
That brings us on to the next point, which really backs up what you've just said there. Now, having reported on the state-backed and UN-sponsored Extinction Rebellion, and it is state and UN-backed, and of course it's got UN employees within it. We're going to go into that tonight, but that's all open on the record, so it's not one of those right-wing conspiracy theories that we hear being talked about all the time. But basically, we produced the evidence in our shows that Extinction Rebellion, the facts, have a look at that one, Extinction Rebellion, the facts, and several others are linked to that show. And it's very important because the actual origins of this organisation and who's involved with it do actually tell you all you need to know. In other words, that it's a state-backed and UN-backed operation. But their founder, Gail Bradbrook, has openly admitted that the government need Extinction Rebellion, who were indeed used for the declaration of a false climate emergency, Remember that Extinction Rebellion, or the government, have used Extinction Rebellion to declare this climate emergency, which would have never happened without them.
Of course not.
And it will give impetus and gain the public consensus the government needs to implement the taxation and restriction of rights, which is the real purpose of the climate change narrative. Now, there's always the real reason hidden behind the crisis, and the real reason, of course, is the agenda. And the crisis needs to be solved. So all you have to do is let people know how to solve this forthcoming catastrophe, and it's, of course, by restriction of all their rights and taxation. What could be better for a government? But Gail Bradbrook said this on Sky News. Now, we're just going to hear exactly what she said.
And we know that we've got to do something massive. And the politicians actually behind the scenes, including this current government, are telling us that they need a social movement like ours to give them the social permission to do the necessary.
So that is absolutely unbelievable that Gail Bradbrook would come out with that. I'll just read that out. This is exactly what she just said. The politicians behind the scenes, including this current government, are telling us They need a social movement like ours to give themselves the social permission to do the necessary.
Yeah.
Incredible, isn't it?
Well, it is, and yet people imagine it's somehow science, And also, the other media, too, which are classed as respectable, are putting out direct lies. Bloomberg is today, they're talking about electric vehicles. And they point out that in China's way ahead of the rest of the world on producing electric vehicles. Now, they want them in their polluted cities in order to stop the diesel pollution. It's straightforward. That's what it's about. And what they said on Bloomberg was, the European countries will follow suit because they need these to cut down CO2. Now, of course, that is a complete direct lie. Electric vehicles per mile produce more CO2 than a diesel or a petrol car. The reason being the inefficiency of batteries. You have to have a power station to produce the electricity to make the electric vehicle go. They're actually coal-powered vehicles. And the actual cost in terms of CO2 production of making the batteries themselves in these vehicles is equivalent to one of those normal petrol cars being driven for 8 years. So it's a massive extra production of CO2 in electric vehicles. So Bloomberg were telling a direct lie.
Well, that's absolutely amazing, Piers. I can't believe that mainstream media would tell lies. But we've got to remember now, because we bring this up in our talks, I'll bring this up in my particular part of the talk actually, it was a Dr. Richard Day who worked for what became the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in 1969 in an off-the-record kind of, it was like an after-dinner speech, if you like. And he said to people, well, you know, this is off the record, but this is what's going to happen in the next 50 years. And everything he said at that place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, at that time, has come absolutely true. And he said to those people, he said, a lot of people think this is communism. But he said this is much bigger than communism. Now, considering that everything that he said in 1969 has come true, the way society's evolved, the way we live in more of a police state, yet we have more law and order problems, and the whole thing of the way society's been engineered, which directly ties in to what the UN Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Plans are all about. Considering that he said this 50 years ago, I think that this is incredibly important, because when we talk about this, we have to realise that this is not just a climate emergency that's happened. It was out of the Club of Rome, the think tank, who said in 1969 to 70 that we need a new enemy, and the enemy will be mankind itself. And we're going to use the threat of floods, floods and famine in the absence of war, and climate change to actually impose what's coming. And therefore, the enemy of mankind is mankind itself. That was pretty much what they said. Go and have a look at that quote. But the point is that, as usual, at this meeting, out of all the people in the room, there was only one person who actually decided to make notes and repeat it 15 years later.
Yeah.
So that goes to show that what Dr. Day was saying was absolutely true, because at that off-the-cuff meeting, when he addressed these students, he said that the problem is people don't know what questions to ask. And he said that people don't do anything either. So this is the only way. He said there's no other way. And that's why, because people do not actually really look into things or even bother to report on what's going on around them. But as the state has now taken complete control of all narratives, and the so-called protesters are themselves the state, let's get into applying the apparatus of the new Stasi. Now, this is a subversive counterintelligence government operation called the Research, Information and Communications Unit. Now, it was established in 2007 as part of the Office of Security and Counter-Terrorism in the UK Home Office. Now, details about their involvement in EU-level counter-extremism work was also revealed in 2017 by Hans Daas, the head of the European Commission's Terrorism and Radicalisation Unit, who told a conference in London that the unit was running a strategic communications network providing support and consultancy to other member states. Now, in recent years, RICU has said privately that its work in the UK is conducted at an industrial scale and pace. Covert projects that have previously come to light include setting up an organisation that held face-to-face talks with university students without disclosing that it represented the government, posting short films and images on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram with no acknowledgement of UK government involvement, leafleting 760,000 homes in areas of the UK with large Muslim populations without any of the recipients being informed that they had been published and distributed on behalf of the government. So this is classic subversion, isn't it? Yeah. Establishing a public relations agency to push news stories to journalists without disclosing in any way that the agency was being operated and funded in accordance with a government contract. Some of the communications are made public through civil society groups, but with RICU saying privately that it always retains editorial control. Now, earlier this year, RICU fought a successful court battle to prevent it being obliged under Freedom of Information law to disclose how it seeks to influence the arts in Britain. So basically, this is from Middle East Eye, and it says, UK propaganda unit has secret plans to target French Muslims. A shadowy UK government propaganda unit that privately declares that it works to effect behavioural and attitudinal change among British Muslims has drawn up plans to begin operating in France. The Research, Information and Communications Unit, which is based at the Home Office in London, generates films, social media websites, leaflets and news stories that are intended to influence public opinion while concealing the British government's role in their creation. Now, documents seen by Middle East Eye show that RICU has awarded a contract to a consortium of communications companies which had demonstrated its ability to operate in France. The papers also show that the consortium which won the contract was expected to demonstrate an ability to operate in at least 4 other countries in addition to France: Belgium, Kenya, Bangladesh and Indonesia. The EU funds RICU work in Tunisia, Lebanon and Morocco through a counter-extremism programme called, guess what, Strengthening Resilience. It's all whenever you see the word resilience, you know that it's basically something to do with
empowerment.
Well, it's to the state clown show, you know. But this is from Per in Sweden, who sent me the article, and he said, another Orwellian outfit ostensibly charged with countering extremism, whilst in fact it will be promoting all kinds of extremism up to including outright terrorism. By now we know their modus operandi. Everything that's supposed to be combating or fighting something is actually designed to promote it. Well, this is the whole point of the post-truth world. Now, this whole paradigm, he says, started with Richard Nixon's war on drugs in 1970, whose main purpose was to boost prices for drugs to increase demand for high-denomination dollar bills, as well as offshore dollar bank deposits to transact the higher turnover in drugs resulting from this war on drugs. He carries on there, but I think that's absolutely fascinating. Now, state-controlled narratives have excelled themselves recently. Let's get on to this. The BBC and its Climate Change, The Facts programme, containing none, of course, and the fake far-right narrative from MI5 and its linked organisations, such as the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, who produce laughable conspiracy theories linking Brexit with being far-right. Now, we have reported on that. The intelligence services are a clown show and linked...
Tony Benn would have been far-right by this time.
Oh, of course. The intelligence services are a clown show and linked to the think tanks and NGOs subverting public opinion, or at least trying to. Now, in our talks on the bigger picture, I refer to a quote by MI5 and government think tank. This is Demos, which is basically linked to MI5. They stated the new democracy will work with a combination of government open infiltration and citizen groups taking direct action. So the demonisation of Brexit has reached comedy proportions, and those who are trying to counter public opinion are laughably inadequate at doing it. Now, the same with the main excuse for global totalitarianism, the climate change conspiracy theory, which also came out of think tanks, particularly the Club of Rome, as we've just described. Now, The Guardian recently issued new guidelines to their trained repeaters to step up the language on the climate emergency. But first, Clown of the Week award goes to UN advocate and Extinction Rebellion fake activist and lawyer Farhana Yamin. Now, this is a Guardian headline, and it states, now this is one of the best headlines that I've heard since London Underground turns off Wi-Fi to stop people gluing themselves to trains. Right? Now, that was just a brilliant headline, wasn't it? You know, this one's even better. This is her. Now, we're talking about a UN human rights lawyer here, who works for Extinction Rebellion, Farhana Yamin. She said, this is the Guardian headline, "It took 20 minutes to unglue me from Shell's office. It was a bit painful." Now, this is a woman with a law degree, right? Now, she's an environmental lawyer who, over the past 3 decades, has worked on a number of international treaties, including the Paris Climate Agreement. Oh, what a surprise she should turn up in a protest group, eh? How would that happen? How would a UN advocate turn up in a protest group?
Well, it's because it hasn't been carried out yet and she's upset.
You may be right. She worked for the UN and is promoting the UN Front Extinction Rebellion. Now, she's represented small island nations, it says here, threatened by the effects of global heating, the new word for global warming, and recently took part in the Extinction Rebellion protests. So, how did you become politically interested in the environment? This is the question that The Guardian asked her. And she states, "When I was about 20 and qualifying as a lawyer, that's when I got interested. It was just before the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. So what a coincidence, eh? She qualified the year before and she became a UN lawyer pretty soon after. I was already working for the small island states in the climate negotiations." Now, this almost sounds like she was mentored by the UN, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And let's carry on.
Because they had no problem at all. It's complete fiction.
Of course. Well, we've reported on that widely, but it says here, and the Climate Change Convention was adopted, and the Biodiversity Convention was also adopted. So all of these agreements were supposed to have sorted out the problem, she says. It was a time when I was very optimistic about what the law could do. Well, since then, she's decided to subvert the law by gluing herself to things, you know. But so they then asked, what do you think went wrong? I think we in the environment movement underestimated the degree of resistance and power against change. So you could mean that despite your law degree, you could not prove your argument through facts. I mean, that's what it could. That's what that could be.
Well,
actually,
the whole thing is fiction. So she's campaigning to have a fiction stopped. Well, it's complete insanity. The whole lot, complete insanity.
Hence the kind of title for this week's show. But we've got to remember also the climate trial in California, where the judge found the climate change conspiracy theorists not only short of facts, but guilty of deceiving the court on the perceived amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. He accused the UN projections of being doom-laden and with no evidence to back them up.
Well, he basically said Miles Allen was a liar, didn't he?
Yes,
Oxford prof.
Yeah, that's right. Now, this legally qualified but fact-free propagandist also wants to normalise civil disobedience. So that's what she's saying. This UN lawyer who works for Extinction Rebellion, she's saying she wants to normalise civil disobedience. Well, when you normalise civil disobedience, it's not civil disobedience anymore, is it? When you normalise something, you neutralise it, and it has no effect. So, as they are merely an extension of globalism and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which she actually had in her hand at one of the Extinction Rebellion orations, she was carrying the 17 Goals of Sustainable Development in her hands.
That includes 5G?
Well, 5G is part of the Internet of Things, isn't it? So basically it is part of the rollout. Yes, and of course Gail Bradbrook was part of Citizens Online, which was about the rollout of 5G.
Which is backed by 5G operators.
Yes, of course, she was involved in the rollout of the Internet of Things. But so basically we have lawyers like this, and they're there to protect our rights. Now, what I would say is that I had a terrible experience of being represented by a UN lawyer in court, and it was the worst possible thing I could have done. I mean, I would have been better off doing it myself.
Absolutely.
In fact, I'd have been much better off doing it myself. But basically, this is quite interesting because she's also now getting over that we shouldn't travel on planes or trains. Well, trains but not planes. She's saying, I travel also a lot in my life. I'm an international environmental lawyer. My meetings are often in the UN, in Germany, or on transatlantic flights. So I think there are certain occupations around which there is an international travel involved, and Emma Thompson is one of them. She's an international film star, but I think everyone should minimise the number of flights they should take, and we should no longer have business and first-class flights. So why don't these useful idiots stop flying?
Yeah.
And then the global
Stay at home.
agenda of climate change propagation
Use WhatsApp.
and taxation would disappear. There would be no problem with the climate catastrophophobia, which is meant to happen sometime in the future. It would disappear overnight if these people stopped flying, wouldn't it?
It would.
There you go. That is actually the solution. So, and then she goes on. George Monbiot said that two most important things individuals can do is stop eating meat and stop flying. You can't really say anything to that, can you?
Well, I wonder if he'd hear. I don't know. It's brain dead. I mean, I don't eat meat myself much. I do eat fish, and I fly at times. But they're complete double standards. All of these people are complete double standards. I mean, this Emma Thompson, flies huge distances to go on a protest about flying and the like. I mean, you could not make it up. The point is, though, you see, what they're doing is they have a false narrative, and then they mobilise a campaign to have the false narrative, the problems prevented. So the whole thing, you see, is a kind of self-supporting.
Yeah, they create the problem because they've already got the solution.
But
Very simple.
The consequences are control, and tax.
Correct. And finally, this is for our UN lawyer who's representing us all. I would say if you lose an argument, which she would, then use the victim card, which she does. So here we go. Get this next bit. Following her speeches in the UK, she said, this is the question. This is the question from the Guardian repeater. Following her speeches in the UK, Greta Thunberg came under attack on social media, particularly from some prominent middle-aged male commentators. Was that a surprise? And she goes, no. When people are no longer able to contest the science or the economics or even the feasibility, they start attacking the people who are good at getting the message across. Greta is an amazing advocate, and she's been subjected to all sorts of personal abuse about her family and her autism. I've had it too. Of course, it's that back to her again, you see.
I see.
I've had it too. Me. Yes, me, the human rights lawyer who glued myself to the Shell building. Even me, and more me. Right? So I've had it too. Essentially, we're being dismissed for who we are. Let's shoot the messenger because the message is too difficult to do down anyone. Don't know what even she means by that.
But of course, look, Greta Thunberg always said that she doesn't know the science and referred to experts elsewhere who knew it.
Oh, you're nitpicking now, Piers.
But you see, I mean, that is the point, that they're not even messengers at all. They're just propagandists.
Yeah, of course.
And she, of course, is essentially, she's been used by people.
Well, the point is, if you want to win a legal argument, it's about bringing forth the evidence.
That's right.
So which bit doesn't she understand?
I know. I mean, there's nothing. Nothing of what you've read out of what she said has got any evidence in it.
Of course not.
And of course, they do not have evidence. They just refer to evidence exists elsewhere. Don't deny it. Well, what is that we're denying?
In conclusion, The Guardian and this advocate of global totalitarianism deserve each other. It asks the questions which call for full-on virtue signalling and barefaced lies. So in other words, they basically set the questions up as a sounding board for them to spout off about themselves, so it becomes personal and personal politics and trivia.
That's true.
So basically they set up conversations
And this
that
passes as a
obfuscate.
newspaper.
Well, I wouldn't say it passes as a newspaper. No.
It attempts as a newspaper.
Yeah. Now, as the UK Guardian posts a new fake news story on climate catastrophophobia, which may happen sometime, maybe in the future, but never with any evidence, pretty much every day. They've also now changed their propaganda style. Now, this is from the Press Gazette. The Guardian has changed its reporting guidelines on issues facing the environment, encouraging journalists to use phrases stronger than climate change. Well, they announce fake news on climate every day, but reporters at The Guardian will now be expected to refer to climate change as the climate emergency, crisis or breakdown, in line with its updated style guide. Okay, so maybe we should ask them when it is, as emergencies are usually announced when there is an emergency, right?
That's right.
So, in other words, if there's an emergency, you generally know about it. It's like, call an ambulance. Is it an emergency, sir? Yes, it's an emergency. They're bleeding all over the floor.
Right.
Now, that's an emergency.
Fact,
Yes. So, in the absence of facts, I don't think there can be an emergency. I think this is something which is a very strong legal point that our UN lawyer there might get hold of if she ever comes to her senses and stops gluing herself to things. But The Guardian also said global heating will be preferred to global warming, while climate science denier will replace climate skeptic. However, none of the original phrases have been banned outright by the paper. Now, wait a minute. So how could they possibly even do that? So if you write for The Guardian, the editor's going to say, you've used a banned word there. You said climate skeptic.
Yeah,
that's
you
banned.
Say climate denier, yeah. Or is it climate science denier? What do they say is the phrase? Look at that again. Is it climate denier or climate science denier that they're using now?
Climate deny. Wait a minute. Let's have climate science deniers. You have to have the science word in there because that means it's more true. You see, because nobody can. I think what it is, they've realised that we say, well, we're not disputing that the climate changes,
right,
so we're not denying the climate change. So we can't be climate deniers because we're aware that the climate changes every day. So they have to put science in now. You see.
Yeah, but we are the ones that actually have science, and they don't have any.
Well, let's not nitpick. However, none of the original phrases have been banned outright by the paper. Well, that's good to know, though, isn't it? I mean, it shows that we're not really in Orwell's 1984, and it's not really newspeak.
I think we've gone past it.
In April, The Guardian added the global carbon dioxide level to its weather page in the newspaper, alongside year-on-year comparisons, in the hope this will maintain attention on the issue. Now, well, that should wake a few people up as to how little of it there actually is in the air, then, shouldn't it, really?
Yeah, but you see, they present it as 400! Yeah. And in small letters, per million.
Yes.
But people don't know. If you say it's 0.04%, people say, what? Is that it? You know what I mean?
Guardian.
So I always use the percentage term if I can.
Guardian editor-in-chief Catherine Viner said today, we want to ensure that we are being scientifically precise. What? Sorry, I'll have to run this one by you again. Yeah. Guardian editor-in-chief Catherine Viner said today, we want to ensure that we are being scientifically precise.
It's utter bullshit.
Isn't that kind of incredible?
It is, isn't it?
While also...
If they were scientifically correct, they would be closed down.
While also communicating clearly with readers on this very important issue. So why have they never done that before then? The phrase climate change, for example, sounds rather passive and gentle, when what scientists are talking about is a catastrophe for humanity. Right? Yes, but where, when, and how? You know, this is the point, isn't it?
Well, the catastrophe this week has been super cold in half of Australia, where it's been the coldest May for, 35 years or something. An amazing cold.
Again, we're nitpicking here.
Well, we are.
Increasingly, it carries on.
But it's the wrong narrative for them.
Increasingly, climate scientists and organisations from the UN to the Met Office are changing their terminology and using stronger language to describe the situation we're in. This is the editor-in-chief of The Guardian. Okay. Now, you'll love this one. Here's one for you.
Betts, my God.
Met Office Professor Richard Betts told the UN Climate Summit in December last year that the phrase global heating is technically more correct. The UN has also taken to using the phrase climate emergency, as seen in a March article by Secretary General Antonio Guterres. So, the UN is using Extinction Rebellion's headline grabber. Now, who would have thought that? Now, they couldn't possibly link, could they, these two things, with a UN climate change lawyer being part of Extinction's Rebellion plan to roll out their gluing of the population to buildings. I mean, they couldn't be linked, could they?
No.
I don't think there's anything... I think that's a conspiracy theory, isn't it? No, actually, Piers, it's a right-wing conspiracy theory.
Or it could be ultra-left, but I think it's far right.
I think it's far right, yeah.
Far further right, even. Beyond the pale.
The newspaper's updated style guide also takes aim at woolly phrases around the issue. these are the woolly phrases that they're going to change, right? The guidelines ask for wildlife to be used instead of biodiversity, and fish populations over fish stocks. So in other words, that's like saying, people have rights and fish have rights. The fish population. What we're going to do about the migrant fish population?
Right.
See what I mean?
Yeah. Well, maybe, God.
Changes to the newspaper's style guide follow several high-profile warnings about climate change. Parliament declared a climate emergency earlier this month after Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn put a motion before the Commons. Comment, please.
Well, the climate emergency is nonsense. I mean, we don't have an emergency. Well, there is an emergency in a way, but of course it's not the one which was talked about, generally speaking, in the media. The emergency now is extreme cold, is coming in a lot of places. And I just cited what's happened in Australia. And last summer we had a big heat wave in Britain and Western Europe, but there was also extreme cold in Russia, for example, at the same time in the summer. So there is a climate emergency, if you like, but it's the opposite to the one promoted by The Guardian. Now, I'd be in favour of dealing with any real climate issues, and they are increasing cold, shorter growing seasons, increasing crop losses due to destruction of insects by wind farms, pollinating insects in Germany being wiped out and so forth. Yeah. So there are some issues, but if the government comes up with anything, it ought to go before a committee of independent scientists that can say, well, this is true, this is false, and what is the cause? Because the cause is certainly nothing to do with it.
You're seriously telling me that a UN lawyer who's glued herself to the Shell building is not qualified to speak. Is that what you're saying?
I am saying that, yeah.
Okay. Well, you're probably right. Again, we're back to the burden of proof, which always seems to be lacking. Maybe our UN lawyer could put them right on a few things, though. However, when propaganda loses its power, then it's just empty rhetoric, and that is all that is now left. But next on the show, we're going to look at how the other clowns in what is known as intelligence are desperately trying to stem the flow of public opinion and demonise those who think outside the box or even see through it. There is also the infiltration and divide and rule strategies. Now, have you heard out there, anybody, have you heard of the Research, Information and Communications Unit apart from on this show? I bet you haven't, have you?
No, I haven't.
And it's managed, this was from a website. This is where it all ties together. It's from a website called counterextremism.org, and it's managed by, yes, you guessed it, the Research, Information and Communications Unit, which was established in 2007. The Research, Information and Communications Unit, cross-departmental strategic communications body based at the Home Office for Security and Counter-Terrorism. Now, we've already talked a little bit about these organisations, so it's part of the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. Now, This is where they all tie together, you see. Well, we've covered this. We've covered the Institute of Strategic Dialogue because they put out papers which we've reported on. And it says here, let's get into what they are first of all. The ISD recognises that cities are uniquely placed to safeguard their citizens from polarisation and radicalisation to create stronger and safer communities. Now, what does that say to you? That means basically global local citizen spying and counterintelligence services. But this strong cities network is all part of UN Agenda 21. So UN Agenda 21 is now part of a spy network. So your local Stasi in the council are a spy network. Very interesting, eh? Launched at the United Nations General Assembly in September 2015, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue's Strong Cities Network is the first ever global network of mayors, policymakers and practitioners united in building social cohesion and community resilience to counter violent extremism in all its forms. Now, what could they possibly mean by this? Now, in other words, change agents controlling the narrative of public opinion in case the truth gets anywhere near the surface. Now, you may think that's a bit over the top, but you don't know where this is going, because if you look at the papers that the ISD puts out, what they did very soon after Brexit was put out a paper which described Brexiteers basically as being part of this emerging far right. And this is what they do. They get they tie people who may want a bit of national sovereignty to the far-right meme that they've created. So it says here, anyway, the SCN compromises more than 100 member cities from every major global region, each with specific lessons, practice or challenges surrounding violent extremism. It serves as a platform for communities, professionals and local political leaders to connect with their counterparts around the world, to learn from one another's experience, to inform and develop their own local practice. Well, that's basically a spy network, right?
Yeah.
That's a spy network. The ISD produce papers such as, we've covered this, The Fringe Insurgency, a paper which broadly aligns Brexit with being far right and stating there is a growing far right. Well, of course there isn't. It is a disgusting smear of those who have any interest in national sovereignty over globalism, and contains over-exaggeration and lies. And we have reported on that in the past. Now, another from the ISD paper, this is again another paper that they've put out recently. It's called Smearing Sweden. It says, over the past 3 years, we have witnessed significant efforts by both state and non-state international actors to spread disinformation online in order to influence election outcomes. Now, that means members of the public expressing views on the internet. That's basically what that means, right? Now, through the deployment of bot and semi-automated accounts on social media sharing false and sensationalised stories, or basically things they don't agree with, or mimetic warfare, they call it, deployed from the chat rooms of 4chan. Well, 4chan is it's a website that puts out all this vast amount of different information. Alt-right and Kremlin-backed activists. So now we're Kremlin-backed activists, you see. This is where it's going.
They've never shown to prove anybody's.
No, but they don't prove it, and they don't have to. They actually say that in their own words. There's no proof of all this, but we assume that that's what's happening. So basically, with all their intelligence and all this counterintelligence and all this ability to kind of surveil people in real time, they still don't know what they're doing. So it's like a clown show. It absolutely is. So basically it says activists have sought to wage malign influence on election campaigns in the US, France, Germany and Italy in favour of xenophobic nationalist parties. Now, is this just the public commenting? I think that's what they're talking about here. The Swedish election provided these international actors with an opportunity to wreak havoc in the heartland of Europe's liberal social democrat consensus. That word consensus, bit of a giveaway. By consensus, they mean totalitarian, right? Yeah. So it's Russia to blame again. But don't worry, Sweden has its own internal hatometer. Did you know that about Sweden's hatometer? So they can do all this themselves. They don't really need the ISD to put out papers for them. Sweden's got a hatometer.
Are you serious?
No, I'm going to tell you all about it now. It's Take the Hate to a Digital Robot by the Swedish Defence Research Institute. Right? Oh, that sounds a bit like the other lot that we're talking about, really, doesn't it?
But how do you do that?
Well,
I'll tell you. Read it, or
I'm going to tell you, Piers, how you can report hate in Sweden. Okay. At the Hatomat, anybody can type in examples of online hate in the Swedish language. The collected material...
Well, there's a block. I'm a bit stumped there. Is there a Google translation?
Of course, you can translate it and then translate it back, couldn't you? The collected material will eventually help justice-caring authorities. Ooh, that's a bit sinister, isn't it? The justice-caring authorities. Sounds a little bit like Clockwork Orange, that to me. The justice-caring authorities. Swedish Orwell speak for police and courts, it says here. I think Pers put that in. To investigate threats, humiliation and harassment of groups or single individuals in digital environments. I mean, I love being in digital environments, me.
Right.
You can't beat it. We're in digital environment right now. Yeah. The Hatomat forms part of a research project whose principal purpose is to investigate the possibilities of using technology to recognise hateful texts in Swedish. The goal is for these technologies to be used by social media platforms and the editorial boards of news media. Behind the digital robot Hatomat stands Sweden's Defence Research Institute. I think doesn't that sound familiar, like what's going on here? I think they're rolling out this internationally, really, aren't they? Sweden's National Police Authority, that's who's involved with that. And the Uppsala University. So it's a big university project too. The project is funded by the Swedish government's technology financing authority, Vinnova. Do you want to help protect society's democratic conversation? Pay a visit to the Hatomat and leave your contribution. It's absolutely incredible, isn't it? Absolutely incredible.
Right, well, how does it work? You type in something and it tells you how bad it is?
Yes, and you give it to them to monitor. So basically, it's like let's go and tell George Soros that he's backing all the subversion in Europe through Facebook.
Okay.
It's a bit like that, I suppose, isn't
okay.
it? You know, this is ludicrous, as the ISD is linked to anti-Russian propaganda, right? Now, this is absolutely brilliant. Online Civil Courage Initiative. This is out of this same institute, right? The Institute of Strategic Dialogue. We're going back to the UK now, after having visited Sweden momentarily. It says, combating hate speech and extremism across Europe through our online counter-extremism hub in partnership with Facebook. And who's monitoring Facebook? George Soros, right? His companies. Now, over the past 3 years, we have witnessed significant efforts by both state and non-state international actors to spread disinformation online in order to influence election outcomes. Through the deployment of bot and semi-automated accounts on social media sharing false and sensationalized stories, we're just getting back to this again, right? It says, in partnership with Facebook, they've got the OCCI is the first strategic non-governmental effort to mount a proportional response to the propagation of hate, violence and terrorism online across Europe. It delivers models that combine expertise from the technology, communications and marketing and academic sectors to upskill and upscale the civic response to online hate and extremism. Now, basically, they're there to address the gaps and needs identified by the counter-speech community in Germany. So we've actually got an organisation that's countering all speech now, right?
God.
It's absolutely incredible, isn't it? And this is, it goes on and on and on. But basically, it goes you into their training. Now, this is absolutely incredible. Like, the OCCI Help Desk connects practitioners with experts able to answer questions and provide guidance on how to develop, manage and measure effective counter-speech. So basically, it's a counter-intelligence organisation. So what they're saying is, we're controlling the narrative online, but we're not doing it well enough. Because, say, for instance, you've got something like the Brexit part, when they try and demonise Farage for drinking wine instead of beer, right? Which is what they said. Which is one of the things.
Well, I would say they're both bad,
so,
frankly.
Nigel Farage is always seen with a pint in his hand, but secretly he prefers wine, you know. And everyone's going, what's this got to do with Brexit, right? So basically, what they're trying to do is they're trying to control things like that. It's absolutely absurd, right? But this article from 2017 is from Politic magazine, and it accurately predicts what has been rolled out by the so-called intelligence services against those who may have a different opinion than the controlled state narratives, which are as unbelievable as any BBC fake news. Now, this article was written by one of its employees and is a US version of the ISD, right? It's called the Alliance for Securing Democracy. I definitely got great titles, these things. The Alliance for Securing Democracy. Well, I thought democracy was a kind of where everyone, you know, had their own
Remainism
opinion,
is
you know.
to destroy democracy.
We've got a secure democracy, you know. They've recently unveiled, this is from 2017, but now you'll get the significance of this in a minute, right? It was called Hamilton 68, an interactive dashboard displaying the near real-time output of Russian influence operations on Twitter, or Riot. So Russian influence operations on Twitter is Riot. Okay, if you're a fan of on-the-nose acronyms, it says here, the dashboard is the product of a research collaboration that includes me, this is this Berger who wrote it, right? Clint Watts, Aaron Weisberg, Jonathan Morgan and the German Marshall Fund, interestingly. The network promotes a selective worldview of Western societies in decline, suffused with crime, chaos and conspiracy, and a Russia and Russian president filled with strength and integrity. Well, actually, when we're talking about things like RT, that's not really what they do, is it?
No.
I mean, you can say they're pro-Russian because they are a Russian TV station,
but
right?
they normally avoid reporting on Russia anyway.
Yes.
Unless President Putin makes a speech about something, but otherwise they don't tell you about any Russian dissent on anything that's happening, you know, and there must be some somewhere.
Yeah, but he says
there is some somewhere. We know that.
Ludicrous, right?
Peter Tatchell tells us.
Of course, and he knows everything. It produces some original content and amplifies content produced by other people, scouring the internet for messages that tear down confidence in democracies while absolving Russia and its allies from any hint of wrongdoing. Now, does this sound like the same kind of thing that's coming out of RT? And it doesn't make any sense, does it? On the BBC, CNN and Sky don't back the state narrative at all, though, do they? I mean, none of them do, you know. I mean, it said that riot is a complex affair. Influence operations are subtle by design, and those behind them don't usually reveal themselves, except by posting under their own names or an alias, which is what they usually do, right? So the dashboard, I mean, this is incredible. These are people who want to play at being spies and James Bond, really, using all the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, you know, and it's just a load of bloody idiots mucking about on the internet, basically. The dashboard shows a mixture of Twitter account types, including openly Russian-backed media such as Russia Today and Sputnik.
Well, it's fun. It's a state media thing. I mean, it's like saying that openly backed state BBC. I mean,
That's right.
It's a state broadcaster. I mean, is this a surprise? I mean, it's ridiculous.
It was shocking, Piers. As well as 600 Twitter accounts linked to a less obvious influence network. So that's just people who tweet about things, right? Okay. But this is the whole point. The Institute of Strategic...
So I must be part of an influence network because I'm tweeting.
Well, you're a sole trader in that respect, though, aren't you? We're talking about groups here. But the Institute of Strategic Dialogue are known to employ people, and this was all brought out in the open. We actually reported on this about 3 months ago, that the Institute of Strategic Dialogue have their own army of Twitter trolls. So they're going, well, Russia's doing the same thing, but we've got no proof they're doing it. But they're actually doing it themselves. Yes, exactly. So basically...
It's wrong, but we're doing it.
Yeah.
Well, it'd be wrong if the Russians are doing it, but it's right if we do it.
So the sheer amount of government propaganda of all types, along with the intelligence services backed by government disinfo organisations, doesn't construct a preferred narrative, does it? I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. But the output of this network is not comprehensive by any means, it says, but it is representative of the content shared by thousands more social media accounts on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and virtually every other major social media platform. A detailed description of how this network was identified can be found on the page. Right, this is where it goes. But in other words, it's just opinions on the internet from a variety of sources. Basically, they're saying content openly created by Russia, content of unclear origin. This is what they're categorising as, which the Russians may or may not have had a hand in creating or shaping. So basically, they're just sitting there going, oh, it sounds like Russia propaganda. They haven't even got any evidence that it is, even though at the tip of their fingers, they have all this surveillance and the NSA in America and all the rest of it and GCHQ, and they still can't be bloody bothered. You know?
You think they'd have double agents in Russia telling them? If it's happening, they'd have some double agents there.
Yeah.
But I suspect it's not happening, so therefore they can't possibly have any double agents for something which isn't happening.
Yeah. So it says here, basically it says the network monitored by the dashboard amplifies 3 types of content. We better just go over these first. Content openly created by Russia, content of unclear origin, which the Russians may or may not have had a hand in creating or shaping, directly or indirectly by driving traffic to certain themes, and finally, content that was created by third parties not formally connected to Russia. It says here, while there has been much speculation about the role of Russia in creating fake news, it is safest to assume that the majority of content promoted by the network falls into the first or third category until proven otherwise. In other words, we haven't got a clue. It was all a load of crap, but I got paid to produce this. Unreal, isn't it?
It is unreal.
So that's the intelligence clown show, everybody. Now, even though you are a counterintelligence unit, you have no evidence that there is propaganda spread by the Russian government. Isn't that incredible? You'd think they'd know, wouldn't you?
You think they would?
You think they would?
I think they know there isn't, so they have to make it up.
But that means that...
The shadow of it. We've seen a hint of a shadow of it, therefore it must be there.
He says some...
We've imagined a hint of a shadow, therefore it must be there.
Some are almost certainly... It sounds a bit like our UN lawyer, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah.
It sounds like that. I mean, I wonder if these people glue themselves to their keyboards during their lunch break, you know. Some are almost certainly in the employ of the Kremlin.
Messages.
But others may be more loosely connected. Now, this is a bit like when they go on to you, well, you're just a front for the oil industry.
Apparently so, though they don't pay me anything.
Which is the problem, isn't it? So I think that's probably about it, unless you want to add anything. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible, this stuff. And it goes on and on and on with this stuff about RT. And it doesn't, of course, say anything about CNN and the crap that they put out, you know. But there you go. I mean, what can you really say about this? Apart from it is a clown show. Would you like to add anything in conclusion?
No. I would say, though, looking at it, that they're not really getting very far, and these false narratives around are getting weaker and weaker. I mean, we're having a second half, are we? We're going to talk about Brexit.
Well, we could come back for a short one.
Yes, I would think we ought to. Maybe we should do that there as to why their narratives fail and how they're going to increasingly fail in the next weeks, months and years.
Well, they're not doing too well, really, are they?
But I think it's worth a bit of discussion about.
I think it is. We'll be back in 10 minutes after we've glued ourselves
to the keyboard.
Okay, see you in a bit. Good night.
Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net.